In a previous video, I modified this 1972 Dart instrument housing to accept a voltmeter where the amp meter used to be. What I want to try and do now is modify it so that I can put an oil pressure gauge in this area here where the oil pressure light used to be. This is the oil pressure gauge I chose to use. It's a Stewart Warner 100 psi gauge. It's a 2-inch gauge. When I hold it into where the panel where it's going to be mounted, it seems to fit the panel pretty well. So what I have to do now is just take this gauge apart to see what it's going to take to make it fit in this area here. These things come apart pretty easily. You just need to pry the bezel away. It's just pressed on around the edge. Once you take a small screwdriver and get it started, one of these paint can openers works pretty well as a pry tool to pry the rest of it apart. You just work your way around the edge. Until you get it pried open. At first appearance, I don't think I'm going to have to modify anything. Simply drill the holes for the studs to go through. So I'll mark those, and we'll see if it's high or low. We don't want it to end up like the situation we had over here where I had to lower it. If I have to lower it, I'm going to have to dimple this to accept the lower part of this canister that's here. But I don't think it'll take much dimpling. Well, that didn't work. You can see I took the hammer and beat a nice deep dimple in here, but it still needs to go deeper, and it's not enough material left. The metal's been stretched thin and it's starting to tear. Not to mention I keep having to elongate the holes. That didn't bother me because I knew I was going to weld up these holes anyway. These were the holes where the original brake and oil pressure light shone through. So I was going to weld those up. But I think now what I did was I took a piece of cardboard and made a pattern. And I think what I'm going to do is cut all of this out and then take this piece of steel that I cut to match my pattern and weld it in there and sort of box this area in. Then I'll get the depth I need as well as plugging up all the bad holes that are in it. I think I've got it cut enough that I can break it out of there. That's a reasonably good fit. So I'll clean it up, tack that in there, and then re-drill the holes for the gauge to go in. Well, here it is complete. I welded it in and ground it off and cleaned it up. At first glance you'd think it was a success, but I mounted the gauge, and when you turn it over, try to put the bezel on. The bezel rubs up against the face of the gauge. That's when I realized that this gauge is deeper from here to the back plate by about 1/4 inch than these gauges are. So this gauge actually needs to recess in there a 1/4 inch deeper than what it is now. So now what I have to do is cut this out, and I'll create a little 1/4 inch deep box to weld over top of this, and then remount the gauge in that and see if I can get it deep enough that the dash bezel will fit on it. I completely welded this in. I wish I had tack welded it and then test fitted it, but I did not. So now I'm going to have to cut all that out. Well, I'll know better next time. Here's my box welded in place. I tack welded it all the way around. I think that's all I'm going to do. I'll use a little seam sealer to fill whatever light gaps might be in there. I have test fit this thing about 50 times to make sure that I got it right. The gauge is quite centered, and I have plenty of room when I mount the gauge. I have plenty of room for the lenses to go in there without affecting the gauge. So what I'll do now is put this thing in the blast cabinet, clean it up, and repaint it. Paint the inside and assemble the gauges. Alright, here it is. The box was tack welded in, and then all the edges were seam sealed just to hide whatever cracks were in there and avoid any light leaks. I repainted the inside. This is a pretty close match to the original color of the inside. I don't know if you'll see a difference in that on the camera, but they're pretty close. And this is to reflect that light bluish green light that the dash lights will put out. Modifications to the circuit board are going to be pretty simple. All I did was take my router and I routed out these holes here to match the new location for the voltmeter to come through here. The original amp gauge was not part of the circuit board anyway. It just protruded through the circuit board, but it was not part of a circuit. Now, because we're doing away with the brake light here that was in this section, we're doing away with the brake light and the oil pressure light. The circuit board, of course, we don't need those circuits for them, and they stick over the box that I put in there, so we're going to have to cut that off so it will fit in there. These circuits were simply, this pin is the ground or return for the oil pressure or the brake light, and then this pin here is the return for the oil pressure sending unit. They're both fed by this voltage regulated circuit that comes off of this pin and goes to both of these. We don't need them anymore, so we'll cut them off, and they will just look like open circuits to the circuitry in here, as if the bulb was burnt out. Be no difference. I've got it all reassembled. Once again, I created a rubber sleeve to go around this terminal stud, and it sticks out just a little bit. That protects it to keep it from grounding out against the case. It sticks out a little bit, and then this is a cupped speed washer, and that speed washer will go down and cup around it. I also created this little disc of plastic to make sure the speed washers didn't cut into the metal casing here and ground them out that way. And I did the same thing with the voltmeter. This is the windshield wiper switch. It initially goes in this way. It's keyed, and there's an index right there, so it goes in this way. But I knew when I created this box here that I was going to have interference with this piece here. It's a rotary switch, and it has no markings on it, so I don't see why it can't go in upside down. So I notched it right here, and now it will fit in upside down. And I'll have clearance. This is the circuit that used to feed the brake light that was over here. I'm going to solder a lead from here and bring it over here and intercept the fasten seatbelt light that used to be independently mounted in here. And what I'll do is convert that fasten seatbelt light to the brake light. So here it is, reassembled. I painted the needles to make them all the same color. I even freshened up the old needles with the same color. We'll probably not use this speedometer because it's got some flaws in it, some rust flaws in it, and I think we have another one that's in better condition. We'll put that one in there. It doesn't have this shroud in it. This shroud goes down and covers the parts of the mechanism that are visible right in here. It shrouds the bottom part of the gauge and also carries a description of the gauge. It doesn't have that in it because that's part of the plastic lens that goes in it, and I'll polish the plastic lenses and then put that all back together when I clean up the bezel. So I guess for now that's all I'm doing here, and I'll take the plastic bezel off and start cleaning that up and polishing the lenses, repainting the edges.